They don't stab you with knives. They embrace you with insight. They don't silence your voice. They echo it until it's no longer yours. They know what breaks you because they are inside the cracks. This is not empathy. This is the shadow in disguise. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So when they say, "I feel what you feel," they do, but not to heal you, to steer you. They walk with your pain, so you'll never suspect they are the pain. Their kindness isn't warmth, it's camouflage. You think you're being seen, but really, you're being mapped. And every smile they study is a mirror they'll later use against you. They don't need to manipulate your choices. They'll simply become the voice inside your mind, until your yes isn't yours anymore. Your trust, automated. Your rebellion, already predicted. This isn't connection. This is entanglement. But here's what Jung taught us. You don't defeat the shadow by destroying it. You defeat it by recognizing it. Awareness is your shield. Reflection is your sword. Because once you see it, it can't pretend to be love anymore. Because once you see it, it can't pretend to be love anymore. And when it loses its mask, it panics. Not with screams, but with silence. It withdraws affection, not to punish you, but to remind you how cold the world felt without it. You'll question your clarity. Was I wrong? Did I misunderstand? Maybe. It was love, but that's how they win. Not with violence, but with your own doubt. They trained you to need their comfort like a lifeline, but it was a leash. And the moment you pull away, you hear their voice inside your head, whispering guilt, echoing, "You'll never find better." They don't lock cages. They hand you the key, but convince you freedom is loneliness. And you, brave enough to open the door, still hesitate because love shouldn't feel like escape. But this wasn't love. This was conditioning. You weren't cherished. You were managed. You weren't heard. You were studied. They cry with you, just enough to stay inside. Every apology was just a reset, not repentance. Every hug was a ritual, not a remedy. You were never safe. You were simply useful. But now, you've seen behind the curtain. Now, you've named the pattern. Now, you are no longer available to be harvested. You are not their project. You are not their blueprint. You no longer bend to guilt or mistake fear for connection. You've begun to recognize the difference between intimacy and intrusion. Every time you say no without explaining, without apologizing, the spell breaks a little more, because now you've reclaimed your mirror, and when they look into it, they line. But it was a leash, and the moment you pull away, you hear their voice inside your head, whispering guilt, echoing, "You'll never find better." They don't lock cages. They hand you the key, but convince you freedom is loneliness. And you, brave enough to open the door, still hesitate because love shouldn't feel like escape. But this wasn't love. This was conditioning. You weren't cherished. You were managed. You weren't heard. You were studied. They cry with you, just enough to stay inside. Every apology was just a reset, not repentance. Every hug was a ritual, not a remedy. You were never safe. You were simply useful. But now, you've seen behind the curtain. Now, you've named the pattern. Now, you are no longer available to be harvested. You are not their project. You are not their blueprint. You no longer bend to guilt or mistake fear for connection. You've begun to recognize the difference between intimacy and intrusion. Every time you say no without explaining, without apologizing, the spell breaks a little more, because now you've reclaimed your mirror. And when they look into it, they no longer see your reflection. They see their absence. They will reach for you, gently, nostalgically, like they lost something real. But what they lost was their control. They will ask to talk, not for closure, but for access. They'll say they've changed. They'll say they miss what you had. But what you had was a maze you kept trying to escape while they kept rearranging the walls. But now, you're outside of it. You've stopped playing a game you never chose to enter, and though you still hear echoes of their voice, of their presence, of your former self, those echoes no longer command you, because silence no longer feels dangerous. Solitude no longer feels empty. Now, it feels like peace, and that peace is proof that you have returned to yourself. You've come home, not to someone, but to yourself, and that is the return they feared most, because when you no longer need them to feel whole, they lose the script, they lose the scene, they lose the story they cast you in. Now, you write the lines. You choose the rhythm. You become the voice you were taught to silence. You begin to notice the quiet isn't empty. It's clean, still, sacred, and where their manipulation once lived. Now there's clarity. Where their approval once dictated your worth. Now there's self-trust. You stop asking, was it me? You start affirming, it is me, finally. The version of you that no longer needs to perform healing to deserve love, no longer needs to shrink to be safe, no longer bends to survive. Now, you stand, and standing doesn't mean loud, it means grounded. It means the shadows no longer chase you, they integrate. Because Carl Jung didn't say destroy the shadow, he said recognize it, bring it into the light, let it speak, and choose whether to believe it. You see, awareness doesn't burn the darkness, it balances it, and that balance is your liberation. This is what real healing feels like, not dramatic, not loud, but certain. And now that you are certain, you are not available to be broken again by someone calling it love. That is a betrayal deeper than violence. One wrapped in warmth, delivered in whispers, dressed in empathy. They don't invade your world. They blend into it. They don't demand the spotlight. They hold it over you like a halo you never asked for. Their affection is slow, patient, expertly rationed, just enough to keep you invested, never enough to feel safe. Their presence doesn't heal you. It suspends you. It leaves you floating between hope and confusion, between gratitude and guilt. And you think, this must be love. They understand me so well. But that's the trick. They don't understand you to hold you. They understand you to hold power. They study your softness, memorize your triggers, measure your silences. They don't need to raise their voice. They already live in yours. They don't shatter you all at once. They erode you, bit by bit, compliment by compliment, pause by pause, until your identity becomes a ghost that answers when they call. They ask questions like lifelines. How are you really? What are you scared of? And you open the door because it feels safe. But it isn't a doorway. It's a blueprint. And they're already rearranging the furniture. You find yourself explaining pain you never meant to share, crying in places that once felt sacred, and handing over truths that were never meant to be tools. But they use them. Always use them. Not obviously, not with malice, but with calculation. They recall your worst moments, not to console you, but to tame you. They echo your ideas until you stop trusting your own brilliance. You ask them for validation, like oxygen, not because you're weak, but because they taught you to suffocate without it. They'll say things like, I'm the only one who sees the real you. But what they really mean is, I'm the only one allowed to define you. This isn't love. This is psychological architecture. You are not their partner. You are their project. They will rearrange your wiring until your joy is scheduled. Your boundaries are negotiable, and your intuition is something they fact-check. They don't need to convince you they're safe. They just need you unsure of everyone else. And when you do pull away, even a little, they don't chase. They grieve, publicly, gracefully. They make you feel like the destroyer, like your autonomy is betrayal, like your questions are weapons. And somehow, you end up apologizing for learning how to breathe. You tell yourself, it wasn't that bad. They had a good heart. They just needed help. But that's how deep it runs, not into your memory, into your meaning. They become the voice that translates your own emotions to you. And when they leave, or when you finally crawl free, you don't celebrate, you grieve. Not because you lost them, but because you lost the version of you who thought that was love. But here's where the story turns. Not with fireworks, not with revenge, with stillness. Realization doesn't always arrive in screams. Sometimes it shows up in a whisper. This was never love. It hurts. Yes, but it's clean, because clarity cuts where confusion corrodes. And in that cutting, you reclaim space. You return to your own thoughts, your own voice, your own rhythm. It's shaky at first, lonely, exposed, because when you've been rewritten, the blank page feels terrifying. But it's yours now. You start noticing things, the way you apologize for simply needing rest, the way you second-guess joy, the way your body flinches at gentle things. These aren't random. They're remnants. But remnants aren't anchors. They're just echoes that fade when you stop answering. And so you start answering to you. You dress for yourself. You speak without rehearsing. You disagree out loud and feel the sky not fall. You tell someone no and don't add sorry. You feel anger and let it rise without folding it into shame. You feel desire and let it bloom without offering an explanation. You begin to trust your own mirror. You begin to decorate your own silence. You begin to believe, not that you are whole because you healed, but that you were always whole, even before you knew it. That's real healing, not becoming someone else, becoming yourself without permission. You don't forget what happened. You just stop reliving it. You don't pretend it didn't hurt. You just stop defining yourself by the scars. And them, the one who mimicked light, they may watch from afar. They may say, "You've changed," and you will smile, not bitterly, but boldly. Because yes, you have. You no longer see love as suffering. You no longer see manipulation as passion. You no longer confuse anxiety for excitement. Now, you crave soft hands and honest eyes. You crave words that aren't sharp with implication. Touch that isn't currency. Connection that doesn't feel like a performance. You no longer romanticize chaos. You no longer chase closure. You sit and let your breath be the answer. And in that stillness, you realize they were never your mirror. They were your mask. And now, you've outgrown it. So if they call again, if they say, "I miss us," if they whisper, "No one knows you like I do," pause, not to react, not to revisit, just to remember. Who you were with them wasn't love, it was survival. Who you are now is not a version they built. It's the one they tried to bury and failed. This is your voice. This is your pace. This is your truth. And if ever again you're tempted to shrink for someone calling it love, let your own breath remind you. You've already survived that once, and now you are unrepeatable, unrehearsed, unclaimed, and finally, unconditionally yours.